Hey, welcome to the Hell Has an Exit podcast. I'm your host, Bryan Alzate. This show is not affiliated with any specific 12-step program. If you or a loved one is struggling with an addiction, please find a local 12-step meeting. If you believe you may need detox or drug treatment of any kind, please call 888-699-9395 to speak to a specialist. The show is sponsored by United Recovery Project, a state-of-the-art drug and alcohol rehab facility. You can visit our website at unitedrecoveryproject.com. All right, welcome to Hell Has an Exit. I'm your host, Bryan Alzate. Today we have a special guest, John Huffington. In this show, just want to say you can always follow us on Instagram at Hell Has an Exit. And, on this show, I always interview people that, I normally personally know, a lot of recovering addicts. But I actually got introduced to John by a personal friend. And he's got an amazing story. He did 32 years in prison on a wrongful conviction. And I know a little bit about the case, but I just kind of want to hear about, your early life and how you grew up and how you kind of got involved in your story and how that unfolded.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Your podcast is, definitely well received and needed, and certainly has impact for a lot of people out there. So I feel very humbled and privileged to be a part of it, and hopefully my story resonates a little bit. Okay, I guess starting out, fairly normal, childhood upbringing, that kind of thing. I grew up, I guess, upper middle class kind of status. But like most folk, we get exposed to a lot of things at young ages and we make choices. And I certainly, got exposed and made very negative choices in lifestyle choices. At a young age, my friends were starting to experiment. It started with marijuana, things like that. And so I did as well. I didn't really like weed. It dried my eyes out. I wore contacts. So it wasn't really my thing, but I don't know. I've sort of always had a business sense too. So I'm looking at my friends buying joints or nickel bags, and I'm like, okay, where did that come from? Ounce, quarter pound. Mm-hmm. So, I got more interested in, the entrepreneurship piece of it. And at a very young age, started, buying, weight and then reselling, so I was a drug dealer, that's what I was doing. But, it was sort of limited just to, the marijuana at that point. There was a few other odds and ends that would come our way, but nothing that I dealt in that regard. But then the 80s hit us, and this is, my formative years. I would have been, in the 16, 17-year-old range. And a friend of mine had gone to college in Florida and fell in with, what we now know is one of the cartels, and wow. suddenly had access.
So this is in college.
This was my friend who was in college. I was still in the neighborhood.
Wow.
I would have been.
How old were you?
I would have been 17 around that time.
Wow.
And I'm just moving out on my own. Getting my first apartment, and I was still doing it sort of half and half. Had a legal job, was working, but I was certainly selling drugs on the side. That was probably my primary source of income.
How much bud would you say you were selling at the time?
Well, back then it would just be like, get a pound and break it down and sell some ounces, that kind of thing. I really wasn't selling a lot of weight. And then the cocaine had come into the picture, and, I bought an ounce, and you break that down, you sell some 8 balls, I was even selling grams and half grams, go to the clubs and do that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But two things happened that changed that dynamic. One, like I said, my friend had gone to college in Florida, and he fell in with folk that had access. I mean, I'm talking as much as you wanted and very good quality. So suddenly I had that, and my friends had they were all coming of that age, and so I knew bartenders, I knew bouncers, I knew club owners, and so now I have this network of distribution. So very quickly went from that, 1 ounce here and there type of deal to keys, and selling to other dealers, and, completely, removing myself from the front lines of the grams and the half grams and things like that. So now, that was my life. And, very quickly, you're partying all night and you live in that kind of lifestyle, like a 9 to 5 doesn't even work anymore. And it didn't work for me.
And how old were you when you started pushing a lot of powder?
17.
17, you're selling kilos?
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy, bro.
So then, I'm 18. I wasn't even working legally anymore. I wasn't even trying to keep up that pretense. I actually had gone and taken out a personal loan, so like in my head, I always think I'm smarter than the average bear or whatever. Like if they come after me, I can say I'm living off of this loan right now, that kind of thing. But I was making, good money, but I was partying hard too. I was certainly living that lifestyle, got caught up, swept up in it. At 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning, my place was the place when the clubs closed. Everybody came over. It was the stupid stuff. You take out the bathroom sliding mirror and you lay out an ounce of cocaine and you go for it.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing, like I was certainly using it, but using it in the sense that I already have like a very hyper personality. Like I'm already energetic to start with. And that sort of fed into my personality, but it wasn't a drug that I had to use or I needed to use. So I don't know.
Yeah, you're more addicted to a lifestyle.
Total addiction to the lifestyle. You get the attention, you get so-called respect. The girls are coming around, and all those pieces, sort of are, very heady for somebody that's 18. And
yeah,
I got
mean,
swept
at
up
18, selling kilos is no joke. I mean, how much was a kilo back then? Like 20 grand, 30 grand?
Yeah, it was in the 20 range, 22. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, I totally lost sense of reality because my reality wasn't real. Like I was living in my own matrix, and you affiliate with society, but you're not part of it. Like there's a whole underground society, obviously. Your peers are people in that lifestyle, and you really lose yourself into that world. I mean, it wasn't until I came out of it, you sort of look back like, almost what the heck, what was I thinking? Like how did that even happen? When you try to dissect that, it just, it morphed into that, and it certainly was not healthy. And
what was your family saying at the time?
Well, I'd moved out of the family home, and my interactions were probably limited in that regard. Back in those days, we didn't have cell phones. That actually was a time where there was no cell phones. I remember I had, a recorder on my phone, big bulky like tape recorder kind of thing. And you had to carry a remote control, call your own number, rewind the tape, that kind of stuff. And my mother had called and, hits this voicemail kind of thing because people didn't have voicemails. It was a recorder. And she left me a message like, why do you have this on your phone? Like only doctors and drug dealers have these, like, well, I'm in the latter category.
Yeah.
But, it just was a very unreal, surreal.
So they didn't know how bad it had gotten. You kind of were distant from them.
There was a serious generation gap. My parents were born in the 20s. I was born in 62. So they were in their 40s before, so, and there's a, the world has changed, and, I was changing with it, but my parents were very old school, old fashioned, and there was a lot of strife between me and them about curfews and activities and my choice of friends. And, truth be told, my parents were right on every single one of those points. But at that age, I was very rebellious. I had a younger brother and sister, who could easily have been influenced. And, it was in everyone's best interest, mine, my family's, that I went and got an apartment at 17 and, kind of kept my distance. And I wasn't raised to be that way. My mother specifically had exposed us to every possible avenue growing up. There was a tennis camp, a bowling league, I played trumpet.
Wow.
So, we got exposed to all that. And more importantly, she exposed us to organizations that gave, created a sense of community, that created a sense of obligation to be aware of your fellow human beings. So I was, youth group at church. I was in the 4-H. I, went with my mother when she did Meals on Wheels. I spent a summer doing a counseling session at a local community center in, a marginalized neighborhood. I did counseling session. I did weeks of what they call counselors or tribe leaders for 4-H camp, things like that. So I don't have any excuses because I was exposed to everything and given every opportunity to really, participate, give back, and be aware of those that needed or were less fortunate and, should have generated more of an appreciation for what I had. And it took years and a lot of other events for me to regain that social awareness and social conscience.
So what happens after, you're 18 years old, selling drugs, living a lifestyle?
Well, it didn't last long because I turned 18 in August. In May, I got arrested, and that was the end of everything.
Wow, so, it was that fast.
Yeah, it was very quick. I know this purpose of this podcast, we don't need to go all into the case itself that caused my problems, but I ended up getting charged with a double homicide that was not something I had done, and what it was is people that I hung around with at the time, I was hanging around with a lot of the Greeks, and the Greeks, like the Italians, everybody's got their own thing. And so I was swept up in that world too, and very easily swayed or persuaded into thinking there was, more to that than it was. So I was friends with a couple. There was 3 cousins in particular. 2 of them I was actually friends with. And the one cousin who is on this charge is the one I actually didn't like because, I always felt, and a lot of people that knew him felt the same way, like he was just addicted to coke. Like he was the kind of guy that interjected himself in both sides of every deal possible. He wasn't a dealer. So this guy is not somebody I would have considered a friend. And he'd come over that night. Well, he had called me trying to get like an 1/8 of an ounce or something, which I only did for friends at that point in time, And I didn't have anything right then, but I was waiting on something. And so I said, hit me later or whatever. But he shows up. And I don't want him sitting in my place. My connect might show up, So we ended up going out and partying with, at a local club, and we were hanging with the owner. And it was a Sunday, and he was shutting down. So we went to another club, all of us from there, and there was where one of the victims worked as a DJ. And this guy had worked with me in the past, but he had his own supplies.
The DJ?
The victim. Yeah, the victim. Yeah. Well, like I said in the beginning, that was, my network. I had people in these various clubs. So my night consisted of running around this circuit of clubs, dropping off, picking up, that kind of thing. So he had some, and so an arrangement was made to purchase that. And he got off at 2 a.m. or whatever. We followed him back to where he lived. The deal was done between the 2 of them. And then at that point, I went home. So I get the call the next morning, from my co-defendant, the Greek guy, and, needing an alibi. And again, I'm young and dumb. I'm anti-police. I don't, I think I'm running with a certain type of element crew type of thing. So I didn't think twice about it. I'm like, yeah, whatever. So I literally that night went and knocked on the police door. When I found out they were looking for me, I went to the police station and knocked on their door. And
like, I got the alibi. He was with me.
Yeah, I go to provide the alibi. And, no sooner do I say that, suddenly the dynamic of that conversation shifted. And, they're accusing me of murder and telling me I was involved and they know better and this and that. And I'm like, holy shit. So my response to them was... So which cousin
was it? Was it the cousin that you didn't like, or it was both cousins?
No, it was the cousin I didn't like. Right. And we find out later that, this was something, he had been trying to do or talking to other people about, killing and robbing this guy and all this kind of crazy stuff. And, it even, been with, he was with these undercover cops, and, they clearly identified the weapon used as his, because he got into the police's car at one point and, said, oh, wait a minute, I got to go back and get my gun out of my car. I don't ever go anywhere without it. So, of course, that made the officer nervous when he got in the car. He said, hey, let me see what you carry. And, so he actually saw the weapon, identified it, had some kind of unique engraving on the hand grip or something. So, but anyway, so yeah.
Now that's is that the murder weapon?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the whole case is convoluted, so when I'm questioned, my only response to them is like, no, I don't have anything to do with this. Like, you can come search my apartment right now. I'll take a lie detector test. I'll do whatever I can to extricate myself. I just don't have anything to say. And of course, they're like, yes to both. Like, okay, we'll come search your apartment. And I was like, and I paused, and they kind of jumped on that, like, well, what are we going to find? And I'm like, you'll find some drug paraphernalia. And so they like, are you willing to turn it in? I'm like, absolutely. As of this moment, I'm retired. Like, I knew that world was ended that second. And I was like, you can have it all. I just want to get myself out of this mess, And so I turned in, quad, triple beam scales, all that stuff.
And you were 18?
Yep.
Wow.
So they left that night, and then the next morning, I made arrangements to go see a lawyer because I wanted to do the lie detector test. I wanted them off my back. Back, like I said, not only did we not have cell phones, it's like, I don't know a lawyer. I'm like 18, so I pull out the yellow pages, that big book they used to issue years and years ago. And, I knew a friend of mine from school. I knew his father was an attorney, so that's all I knew. And I looked him up by the last name and called that law firm and went over there. Well, it turns out his father was a civil lawyer, and his uncle was a criminal defense lawyer. So, it was his uncle that I went and saw and told him what was going on. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I want to take this lie detector test. I just, want to make sure I have a lawyer in the room or whatever. So he said, okay, fine, I'll set that up. And leaving his office is when I got arrested, because his office is across the street from the police station. And my co-defendant, the other guy on this charge, his father and uncles own a restaurant next to the police station. So when I walked back to the car, his father was standing out there, and I said good morning to him and went and got in the car. Well, what I didn't know was during the course of the night, he had turned himself in through an attorney to the police, but put everything on me, claimed he was a hostage. I held a gun on him, committed 2 murders, on and on and on. So now they're looking for me, and I don't know this. So his father runs in there and says, John Huffington's out in the parking lot. Next thing I see, the back door fly open, and a dozen officers are fanning out into the parking lot, guns drawn, and we're the only car moving. We're just starting to pull out of the parking spot. I was with my sister's fiance, and I just told him, you might want to just stop. I think they're coming after us. And sure enough, they surrounded the car, and that was it. And it took 32 years, 2 months, and X number of days before my feet ever hit the pavement again. So that was 18 years old, and when I walked out the door, I was 50.
Wow. How old was the cousin?
He was mid-20s.
So what happened with the case? I mean, was there like any other people, any witness, anything like that?
No, there was never any of that. There was circumstantial. And then you get the FBI lab involved. And I had 3 so-called experts from the FBI lab that got involved in my case. One was a hair analysis. One was what they call CBLA, which is composite bullet lead analysis. And that's where they examine like the lead in the bullet and compare that to different bullets found or whatever. And the other was the stripling. There's an expert on the way a bullet travels through the barrel. It leaves stripling on the bullet itself, and they can, they claim they can identify or they can link that right back to a specific weapon. So, honestly, when I went to trial, I was so naive. I'm just thinking.
So he murdered 2 people?
I mean, he was charged and convicted for that, yes.
Wow.
But I went to trial first, and, of course, they're going after the death penalty because, they have him as a witness against me. The problem was though, they didn't believe him. The state's attorney knew he was lying because for various reasons, and plus they were going to prosecute him. So they couldn't put him on the stand as their witness. When a lawyer puts a witness on the stand, they're vouching for their credibility. As an officer of the court, you cannot put somebody on the stand if you know they're lying. And, Canaris is the name of my co-defendant. Canaris had already failed 2 lie detector tests. Interestingly enough, they gave him lie detector tests. They never gave me the lie detector test I got arrested trying to set up. To this day, 30, and now it's 40 years later, I've never taken that lie detector test. It doesn't matter at this point, but I get locked up and I go to jail, no bail. He gets charged and they set a bail. And then they unsealed the indictments against him on those drug charges that I was talking about, where he brought the undercover police. They unsealed that and gave him another bail on that. So what they were doing, though, he was aware of another deal that was in motion already. There was some cocaine that was being brought in from Texas, and he knew about that, and he set that up to be busted. So the guy that was the transport for that got busted in a Golden Ring Mall shopping center parking lot with like $300,000 worth of coke. Canaris gave that to them. So once they busted that guy, they didn't really need him out there anymore. There was nothing else he knew about. So they revoked his bail, said he was a flight risk, and put him in the county jail where I was. So now we're both sitting in county jail waiting to go to court. But of course, I'm going to go first because they need him. They still want him to think like it's not going to be so bad for him, and they need his testimony.
So he can keep telling, yeah.
And they're going for the death penalties in my case.
Wow.
Because they got him saying I'm the trigger man, because in Maryland, in order to qualify for the death penalty, you actually have to be what they say, the trigger man. You have to be the perpetrator. Otherwise, you could be there and it's still felony murder, and that's life, or accessory, and that's life. But to get a death penalty, you actually have to have committed it. So now, I've got a prosecutor who's, an assistant state's attorney.
So what's going through your head at this time? I mean, you're 18 years old and they're telling you that you killed 2 people.
Well, I know I didn't. So that's what's going through my head. So, I'm still, like I said, I'm still naive enough to think that the system works. Like it'll figure itself out. Like, honestly, the truth will come out and I'll be found not guilty. And, I was actually at that first trial, I was actually found not guilty of 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. And I started to breathe that sigh of, like, okay, it's over. But then they had put it in the same count, which was, 2 counts of first-degree felony murder in the same count, and they found me guilty of that. And I was like, my head was spinning. Like, you just said I was not guilty, now you're saying I'm guilty. Like, that I couldn't even rationalize, because you're standing there taking in this verdict, trying to, process it. And, I'm 18, I think I'm smart. I think I know what I'm doing, but, I'm now, 50.
Did you ever get like a good attorney or something?
Well, not until years later, many, many years later.
Wow. Because you just figured it would like shake itself out, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things like, how are you going to get found guilty of something you didn't do? That's your premise going in, but it just became more and more. And, it's a change of venue. I end up in this little small country town where they're more interested in, planting the crop than sitting there for 2 weeks listening to testimony. So, and then you get the FBI coming in their suits and ties. And, in particular, I had this hair analysis guy from the FBI come in and, he testified to, a 98.7% certainty these are John Huffington's hairs. And they were claiming they had 2 of my hairs at the scene of the crime, which,
wow.
What makes it worse is they claimed that those hairs were found literally on the victim's body. So, if you're on a jury and you're like, well, then how did your hairs get on the person's body, a dead body, if you didn't do it?
Yeah.
So, it's not a far reach to see why a jury would convict. But fast forward,
and they're thinking that like there's no way it's an error. This is an FBI lab that probably operates at like 100% certainty.
Oh, come on. It's the FBI. I mean, we were all taught to believe that was, the highest possible echelon of integrity and, best practices and everything else. And so was I. But I'm sitting there like, I don't know how my hair got there. Like, what are you talking about? Like, so, I ended up on death row. Actually, I had 2 death sentences plus 21 years, all consecutive. But the thing about death row at that time, and actually the whole 10 years I was on death row, we weren't locked down like normal death rows are segregated, solitary confinement. We were in population, regular prison population. And so not only am I trying to adjust to that, but now, I'm this skinny little white kid from the county walking into the Maryland State Penitentiary, population. So I had to adjust to that as well. And, it's just overwhelming. It's an assault on your senses. It's an assault on your mental process to even start to figure that one out. And I guess I did.
That's so crazy.
I mean, there were young people in there. I certainly wasn't the youngest. The thing at that time, and we're talking about 81, 82, there weren't, I'm Caucasian, and, there weren't that many white guys in population, And I wasn't going to do anything but be a man and make my way through it, period. So I did,
What was that like? Like, what was like the day to day? I mean, I'm not familiar with how death row works. So death row is basically you're on there so that way you could get the electric chair. Like, that's basically what they're doing at that time.
In Maryland, it was a gas chamber.
Holy shit, that's crazy.
But in that particular time, they didn't lock down death row. Matter of fact, we could actually live anywhere in the prison, meaning we could be housed in any housing unit, any cell, that kind of situation. Like, there was no distinguishing us. The inmate population, trust me, is extremely educated, and they know who everybody is. And, quite a lot of them actually watch, public television and things like that. But they're very aware of who you are, why you're there, what your charge is, your time, that type of thing, especially a high-profile case. And, the guards were aware simply because they had a board with our IDs on it. I think there was probably, that time, maybe 14 of us on death row. And so they just had like a board with an extra ID of us on it so the guards would know that guy's on death row, but no other distinction.
So how long do you do death row until they actually kill you?
Well, there's no framework of that. Every case is unique to itself. It depends on your appeals, where you're at with your appeals, did you win? What stage are you in? It's all based on that individuality of the case. And at the time, there was not a real rush to execute anybody. So it wasn't a push for that, I guess. And then we had a guy, that did where he was like, I'll buy the bullet. It was firing squad. And, he wanted to die. And so he dropped all his appeals. For some reason, I can't remember his last name. But we had a case like that in Maryland. John Thanos did the same thing. He had done a bunch of time, got out, went on some stupid rampage, and got caught. And he didn't want to do any more time, so he refused to appeal and all that. And they killed him. They put him in the gas chamber. And the minute that happened, it sort of opened the floodgates. And there was 4 more, I think, after that. And these were guys like John Thanos. I'm not a fan of at all. I knew him when he was doing time, and the stuff he did when he went home, it was unbelievably, crazy what he did. So no respect, zero respect there. But there were some guys that they did execute that I'd gotten to know, and that's hard. You feel it. I don't make a comment one way or the other on their case. They may or may not have been fully guilty. I'm not going to comment on that, but.
Now, are you in prison saying you're innocent to other people? Or are you keeping that to yourself?
First of all, nobody really discusses their case. You don't discuss anything because everything can be a weakness. Like, you put your mask on, you don't show emotion. You don't let nobody into your world. You don't let on to anything. If you forge friendships, then yeah. I mean, I never made any bones about it, but who cares? Nobody wants to hear that. Of course, everybody in prison's innocent. But, I was, and, I made it clear. And the interesting thing about that is, especially prisoners are really, really good judges of people. They're really good at reading people. And we knew, I can look at I know for a fact a couple guys that were innocent. I knew it. You can tell. They did, and I was really grateful. 3 of those guys who I helped raise, because they came in at 17 years old, they just got released Thanksgiving before last. They got exonerated. And I'd said it all along. I knew they were innocent, so proud to see. I was right there at the courthouse when they came out the door. So, we know amongst each other, we do know. And I always draw the analogy. It's like you fall through a hole in the ice, and you drift a little bit, and there's only 6 inches of ice, and people are up there, and you're screaming as loud as you can, and everything coming out is these air bubbles. Nobody can hear you. You know what I mean? You're trapped. You're just trapped, and it's something as minor as 6 inches of ice is keeping you from, being heard. And that's what it felt like. It just feels like you're smothered in, just a coffin in a sense.
What was going on, like, emotionally inside? Like, were you calling your family? Was your family trying to help you get out of there? Like, anybody on the street? Like, were you starting to, like, write people? Like,
Well, I was definitely doing a lot of the writing. As far as family goes, like, my father and we'd always had some issues to start with. And, he's a very proud man, and the family name had just been trashed. And so he completely pulled back. So there was no support. There was no official family support like that. I was on my own, financially and everything else. I'd made my choices and rightly so. I made my bed and it was up to me to do something about it. My mother was extremely supportive, and visited every chance she could get. My older sister was in college at the time, so that was difficult. My younger brother and sister were in high school, and difficult for them. This was, front page of the local paper for like 9 months straight every week as a weekly paper, and they always just had to find something to write about, and it was hard on them, and very unfair, but, I don't have any control over that. But on my end, like, I just, my first year in the penitentiary, I just hit the law library. I literally was in the law library like every day, just studying and reading law and trying to, fight my own fight, like fight my way out of it.
So, like, you're committed to getting out. Like, your first year there, you're getting out. You're fighting this. Like, you don't ever think that you're actually going to die in prison.
No, not at all. And, I was just intent on, surviving and fighting my way out. And then I actually won a new trial a year after I was sentenced to death row. The whole thing got thrown out and started all over again. And the problem with the second trial was, I got a court-appointed attorney who didn't do anything. Like, literally, at my first trial, my defense lasted for a week. I'm talking about 5 days of testimony. At my second trial, my lawyer didn't present one single witness, not one. When the state rested, he rested because he hadn't did any of the work. He didn't even hire an investigator until that weekend before we were supposed to present our defense on Monday. I met with the investigator on Saturday, and he made no effort to go get these witnesses. And we certainly had 5 days worth. Plus, we had learned about 4 more witnesses just watching my co-defendant's trial, which had happened after us. So we found out about witnesses that the state's attorney had withheld from us and not told us about that were exculpatory to me, including 2 state troopers,
Wow.
We didn't know about them. So, including another guy that, apparently Canaris had been with and tried to get him to do this crime, So there was all kind of things available that were not taken advantage of. So the second trial, the result was the same thing. Convicted, put back on death row. And at that point, I had attitude. At that point, I was pretty much over it. I was angry and I was bitter. And I started getting in trouble in prison and in jail. Like, I actually got street charges at that point just because I just wasn't, going to accept anything. I had such a chip on my shoulder. I tried to escape. And I got convicted of that. I got 5 years for that.
How'd you try to escape?
I sawed through some bars. I had some hacksaw blades smuggled in and sawed through some bars. And
oh, my God.
Made it all the way out to the window. Yeah.
Wow.
I was done. I wasn't sticking around for this anymore. My faith in the justice system was over. Like,
I cannot believe you saw through some bars. I've never heard that in my life. That's crazy.
And, I had, I don't know, 2 or 3 assault charges, like the officers, that kind of thing. It just one of them things. Like, I wasn't being aggressive and I wasn't looking to fight, but I don't want anybody to put their hands on me, inmate or officer, and that setting me off. And then I had my little wake up moment, like, I'm gonna say around 86. Like, that lasted for a year and a half, the bad behavior part. And then I got involved in an organization that was in there, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, of all things, the JCs. And, it reawoken my social conscience. And I was like, and I took a look at myself. I had my epiphany. I took a look at what I was doing, and I'm like, whatever's going to happen, like if I were to lose all my appeals and be executed, like I'm not going to go kicking and screaming, and I'm certainly not going to give them more ammunition to say, yeah, look at this guy. He was a bad guy. I just like, no. And more importantly, I just made a decision I needed to make some value out of my life. Like I had to make my life count for something,
And like, are you like believing in God? Are you like in there praying? Like, are people like,
No,
is someone in there helping you? Like, you're just like kind of just making your own way that like, I'm just going to man up and do this?
Yeah, totally. Like in the beginning, I was raised in Presbyterian faith and was a member of my church growing up and all that. And, I had my faith, and I got involved with the Christians in the prison, but I totally walked away. I was with, the prison chaplain we were all in a group at one point, and there was another chaplain that was there visiting, and he said to that chaplain, somehow the death penalty came up, and I'm standing right there, and he sort of said it to me too. He's like, part of my job is to go to the governor and ask for commutations in these type of death penalty cases, to stave off the execution. He said, but I would never do that if I didn't believe that person was born again. And I just looked at him like,
wow.
Basically, who the F are you as a man to judge somebody else's belief?
So he's basically saying, I have the ability to save somebody's life, but why would I save them if they're not born again?
Right. Like what happens if the person is Muslim or Hindu or Buddhist?
Yeah.
You're not going to get involved like that. That moment right there is when I totally walked away from all organized religion. Inside a prison.
Yeah.
Like I have, I always tell people to this day, my church is the ocean. I go stand in the ocean at 5 a.m, drink my tea, make my peace, talk to my higher power. I have nothing against organized religion. It's not for me. I don't believe man should be telling other men. I think we find our own interpretations in our own way.
100%.
And yes, there are good pastors. There's good pastors out there that can help you, guide you in your journey, but not tell you and dictate to you how it's supposed to be. I don't believe in that.
Of course, and tell you that other ones are all wrong and that they're the ones that got it right. Yeah.
Let people believe what they're going to believe, and try and find the middle ground instead of taking these staunch opposition stances, and they're polarizing that you can't even hear what the other side is saying. I'm very eclectic in my learning. I like to hear and learn and then make my own decisions.
Of course.
But yeah, I mean, like I said, there's a saying, I don't know if you've heard the saying about the dash. The dash is, at the end of all of our time, unless you're cremated, I guess, but there's a tombstone, and on that tombstone are 2 dates, and in between is a dash. And it's that dash that defines us. Like, what did you do? How did you make your life count for something? The average person just simply raising a family and, perpetuating your DNA and good citizens into the world, that's a great legacy to leave. And other people are going to have buildings named after them, or they're going to invent something that helps humanity or saves, cancer victims, or, there's those extremes. But the average person, it's just about figuring out how to make your life mean something, and that's where the quest that I went on. I was like,
wow.
No matter what happens next, like, one, I'm going to give my parents something to be proud of. I was always fighting for my father's approval, never ended up receiving it. But, I was striving for that. I went and got in the college program. I graduated, 4.0. I was summa cum laude. I was the valedictorian. I was all that stuff. And I only did it in 3 years, because they took away our Pell Grants. Congress took away our Pell Grants and stole my senior year. But, I tried to do all these things, one, to sort of redeem myself with my parents, but also just to make it count for something and, make a difference,
Wow.
I never stopped fighting in the courts. There was, I won't bore you with all that. There was a barrage of appeals, 5-4 decisions against me, meaning I missed it by one judge. Very close decisions.
Wow.
And then there was a lot of weight. At one point, we did a post-conviction, And, we brought the guy from California that actually invented the composite bullet lead analysis test and taught the FBI how to use it. And we flew him out from California, and he testified.
Who's financing all this? Is this like a pro bono thing that a law firm eventually picked up?
It is. So, yeah, I should be very clear on that. In, I want to say the mid-'80s, there was an attorney who wanted to take on a death penalty case at some point in his career. And luckily, he got matched up with me,
Wow.
David Stewart. And he was with a law firm in D.C., Miller, Cassidy, the Rocca Lewin, something like that. And so he started with my post-conviction. And during that time, he got offered a partnership at a different law firm, Ropes and Gray. And he told Ropes and Gray, I'll take that opportunity, but I need to bring this case with me. I'm not letting go of this case. And they agreed to it. So Ropes and Gray has now been my pro bono attorneys for, oh my God, over 30 years. Let's just say well over 30 years.
Holy shit.
And just like David Stewart, David Stewart did that because two things. One, once he looked at the case, he knew this is messed up. There was several legal issues that had risen there. And then two, he met me and he believed in me. And, I've had the very good fortune. David's now retired. He's an author. He writes books. But they always had like a chair, and then, oh my God, all kind of paralegals and back office staff, things like that. But they've always passed it on, lawyer to lawyer to lawyer, till the point where I'm at today. Actually, all the lawyers that were part of me getting out have moved on, and it's changed over. But what's never changed is their commitment to making sure, one, that I got out, two, that I never went back. It's an amazing, amazing story. And, I don't think you'll find any other law firm would even consider committing that much time, money and everything else into it. And,
wow.
They've been amazing. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if it wasn't for Ropes and Gray. There's no doubt about that.
So tell me about them flying out this expert.
So we brought that guy in, and of course he testified that, the FBI was doing the test wrong, and what they were trying to testify to in my case wasn't correct because, their formulas were wrong and they were looking at the wrong thing. Their analysis was wrong. So, the post-conviction was, that well presented. It was not just that guy. There were several witnesses that they had put together and brought in, and basically almost like a mini trial. But I only bring that part of the appeals up because, okay, we're in court for maybe 4 or 5 days, presenting evidence and testimony. And then, of course, the judge is like, okay, I'll take it all into consideration and get back to you. And that didn't happen. It took 3.5 years for me to get that decision from that hearing. So that just sort of tells you how much attention they paid to all my appeals, like 3.5 years to get a yes or a no. And of course it was a no, it was a denial.
Wow.
So that's the kind of, you learn patience. You learn that the system's going to not move at any pace that any reasonable person would think, that it would take that long on different parts of it. And so, I don't want to say I'll say I adjusted. I'd never accepted my circumstances in prison. I just went looking for ways to make it a better situation. So, like I said, I became president of that organization for numerous years. And we did a lot of community and charity kind of things. We helped raise money for a young girl that needed a bone marrow transplant that the insurance company wasn't going to pay for. Inmates doing this.
Wow.
When our Maryland schools in Baltimore City, they were having a lot of problem, I want to say late 80s, with, kids killing each other over jackets or shoes and stuff like that. So they put them into school uniforms to try and alleviate that situation. And a little girl had gotten killed, by a stray bullet during, a shootout or whatever, at one of our middle schools at Utah Marshburn. And so in her memory, we got involved, inmates, my chapter of the JCs, there was a chapter of the NAACP that was inside as well, and they led the charge on this one. And we raised money. We bought those school uniforms. We helped put those kids in uniforms, So
That's so cool.
And I just saw a recent article where there's some inmates in California just did something similar to send somebody to college or something. There's a lot of good men and good women that are incarcerated. It doesn't mean they lose their sense of community. It doesn't mean they lose their sense of humanity. You know what I mean? And they try to do the right thing when given the opportunity. So my role was kind of uniquely situated because I had the respect of like the prison population, and then I also had the respect of the administration. So I could sort of, I could get things done. And, we did several like really big projects that, had some impact and, helped the guys inside, but also helped the community out here, so my mother used to tell me, you must be there for a reason. And, I think she was right in a sense for two things. Like, a lot of those younger guys started following me. They joined JCs and, got out of the gangs and stopped running wild on the yard and became men, became responsible men, went and got their GEDs or college degrees or whatever. And now here we are, 40 years later, and those same men are out here and they're doing well.
Wow.
I hired a couple of them.
Wow.
Two of them were my case managers at my other organization. And,
wow.
But yeah, we do an annual picnic where we try to get everybody together and just sort of check in on each other. We have
that's so cool.
My best friend has created a support group called First Money Empowerment Group where we try to get everybody together and, pass on job tips, just look out for one another. And because we're all, kind of older now, so it's a lot harder, when you've come home after decades in prison and you're older to, really land on your feet and find your way.
How did you deal with the harboring the resentment? Like, did you feel angry? Like, at one point, did you forgive somebody? Like, how did you deal with that?
You compartmentalize it, I guess. I mean, I get asked that all the time, especially, when I do these kind of talks. It never fails. Somebody will ask me, why are you not angry and bitter? Two answers to that. One is, if I were angry and bitter, your professor wouldn't have invited me to speak. You're like, oh, let me get that angry and bitter guy off the street and bring him in and talk to my kids.
That's true.
So there's that. But, Nelson Mandela, there's a quote attributed to Nelson Mandela when he was released from prison in South Africa, where basically he said, I knew when I walked through those prison gates, I had to leave my anger and resentment behind in order to lead a fulfilled life. And, you compartmentalize it, what does it get me? I can't look backwards. I have today. I have today to enjoy. Hopefully I have tomorrow. And, I want to build a life. I still want to have impact. I'm still driven even out here to have impact in my community in the city that I live in. And I'm very involved in a lot of community activities and sit on a couple of boards and that kind of thing. I don't want to look back. Now, that being said, in the beginning, I had faith and trust in a system, and that was betrayed. But what made it worse was the prosecutor in this case. The prosecutor in this case started out, this is early on in his career. He's an assistant state's attorney, and he gets this case. And now, he gets, a lot of attention because it's a double death penalty case, and I'm on death row. At that point, he runs for state's attorney and wins. And then he became the longest serving prosecutor in Maryland's history. He held that office for 37 years. So he was the nemesis. This is Captain Ahab and Moby Dick's situation, he always came after me no matter what. And at first I thought, okay, he's doing his job. Because interesting enough, my mother and his mother knew each other. Our sisters took piano lessons together.
Wow.
And again, I'm thinking he's just doing his job. But then we start peeling back the layers of things he was doing, including, pulling me out for an attorney visit when I was in the county jail. Like, you can't do that, and then lied about it afterwards. And then there was a whole lot of other things that we uncovered, that he was withholding evidence and everything else. And then it leads to how I came home, which, starts with the Oklahoma City bombing case. After that case, a whistleblower came out of the FBI lab, made a lot of allegations about what was going on. It launched a big investigation by the Inspector General's office, after which they issued, 400-page report. In that report, they named the agent who had testified in my case, the hair guy.
Wow.
And what they said about him is that he consistently misrepresented evidence and testified outside of his area of expertise. To me, that sounds like you just called him a liar. What do I know? But I was never able to win an appeal on that. So time goes on. I get affiliated with the National Innocence Project. I want to say like 2003, somewhere in there. We filed to DNA test those two hairs. So this is going to cost me probably $15,000. I have to pay for this. Okay. Wow. Now remember, I've been locked up, my whole adult life, $15,000. So the minute we filed that motion, the state's attorney in writing, can't make this up, in writing, his response was he asked the court's permission to destroy the hair evidence.
Holy shit.
That argument didn't win. The judge did not grant him the right to destroy the evidence. So it was approved for us to test it. So it goes to the number one DNA lab in the country, mitotyping DNA in Pennsylvania. And then we get a call my lawyers get a call from the lab, and it's like, what do you want us to do? And I'm like, test the hair. What are you talking about? Well, it turns out it's not two hairs. It's like 10 microscopic slides. Each slide has 5 to 6 hairs on them. None of them are identified. They're sort of laying on top of each other. It's like it would have cost probably $80,000 to $90,000 to test all those hairs. And at the end of the day, like, where did they even come from? Where'd they come from? We don't know.
God damn.
So that never made it any headway.
Oh my God.
So then at that point, we had to send it back, and we're done. Like, there's nothing else to do. Like, at that point, my lawyers were actually like, yeah, we're going to have to withdraw from the case. So there was a period of time.
How long have you been in prison at this point?
That would have probably been like 28 years or something.
Wow.
Yeah, it was around that time. It was a good bit, 25, something like that. And then in our state, our governor signed a new law into effect, which was called the Writ of Actual Innocence. And it's not based on DNA. It's based on totality of the evidence. Because normally you can only talk about one item. You can say, that's a glass of wine. You can't talk about the fact there's a plate with a steak and vegetables on it and a cup of coffee. You can't now use that to say, well, this is dinner. You just have to say that's a glass of wine. So under totality of evidence, you can bring everything in and say, yeah, if you look at everything together, it starts to add up. So my law firm came back in. We filed that. We went to court. And now the state's attorney, being the smart ass that he is, he's telling the judge, like, I'm tired of this case. He had a chance to test the hair. He never tested the hair, and da-da-da. So now the judge is like, yeah, why didn't you test the hair? And it gave my lawyers an opportunity to say, well, Your Honor, here's why.
Wow.
So the judge turned to the state and said, I want you to test these hairs. I'm going to hold this whole hearing, until we get the results. So all summer long, they were supposed to test the hairs, and he never tried, not once, to test the hairs. Instead, he spent the summer, he had the FBI lab or whomever DNA test, like the pants, the boots, the jacket, any article of clothing. All of it comes back negative. So we get to September or whatever, and he contacted my law firm and said, we're done. I don't have anything left to test. Let's just go back to court. And meanwhile, the judge had asked a couple times, how's it going? And he's like, oh, yeah, we're working on the testing now. But again, he was never testing the hairs. We don't know why. Until suddenly, out of the blue, we get a phone call, we meaning my law firm, from Spencer Shue, who's a reporter at the Washington Post. And he's about to do this big expose on the FBI lab, Watergate style, And he researched it. And I'm the Maryland case where this, particular agent had testified. And Michael Malone's his name. So he was calling my law firm for background. So, of course, my lawyers are like, well, we're in court. We're still in process. We can't talk about the case. Well, he had my FBI file. He got it through the Freedom of Information Act. And I should note that we tried to get that years earlier. It took a year, and we were denied. They said it wasn't there. It wasn't in the file cabinet. So we never got that file. So when he told us what was in there were 2 documents. After 1999 with the Tulsa, Oklahoma City bombing case, what nobody knew, we knew about the public report that came out to the Inspector General's office, but what the public was not aware of was the FBI had launched their own internal investigation, and they hired outside forensic scientists to come in and review every case that Michael Malone had touched. So in my file, there's a report from their expert, and that expert said, no way.
Wow.
His findings were there was no way that FBI agent Michael Malone could have said to a 98.7% certainty. Like, he even questioned whether Michael Malone had even done the test himself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this whole report. And then the other document was a letter from the
And that was in your file the whole time?
The whole time.
God damn.
And also, so now the FBI sends a letter to the state's attorney telling him about this report and telling him he might want to notify me or my attorneys because it's exculpatory. And the state's attorney buried that.
Wow.
2003, when I go to try to DNA test the hair, the first thing the state's attorney did, ask permission to destroy it. Now we know why. Like, we didn't know why. Why would you ask to destroy the evidence? He already knew there was a problem with it. So now this is about to come out. And let me tell you something. When it came out, it was front page. It was a humongous article. It got picked up internationally. It was a big scandal with the FBI lab. It was on every talk show. I mean, the FBI lab discontinued their use of microscopic hair analysis over this. So, this big article's coming out. So he scrambles. He goes back to the FBI and says, shit's about to hit the fan. We got to do something. So they announced they're going to DNA test the hair, and their test is going to consume the sample. So I'm hitting the panic button in prison, like, no, get that back to our lab. If we let them test it, they'll use it and say it's mine. There won't be anything left for us to counteract it with. But they did it as a peer review, meaning they had other scientists or whatever watching the test when it was conducted. And long story short on that, it was not my hair. DNA conclusively proved it wasn't my hair. So you would think happy ending, I win a writ of actual innocence and go home. Well, that's not what happened. I did win the writ of actual innocence. I had to pay $500,000 cash bail to come home. And then the first 4 years I was home, I was literally on bail because it had been sent back to the same state's attorney to decide about further proceedings. So, of course, he's still going to come after me. I'm facing another trial where he's going to try and send me back to prison. For the first 4 years I was home, that's what I was living my life like. But, I got really blessed. I had a pretty strong network. I landed on my feet, I guess, pretty quickly. Was able to start a career. Now, this is all while I'm still on bail. Basically, I got one foot on a banana peel. I could be sent back to prison. But, I was successful in launching a career. I actually became the director of workforce development for one of the largest nonprofits in Baltimore. And I oversaw, I had a staff of probably 25 direct reports to me, and very prestigious. And I was senior staff. I'm running, the adult workforce program for Baltimore for them. I'm in charge of a budget of $3.5 million. I have 3 physical buildings under my portfolio, and people that I'm responsible to, mm-hmm. And meanwhile, I'm on bail the whole time. So
wow, that's so cool.
I was blessed in giving that, in being given that opportunity, and having a chance to again have impact and make a difference, through my work. So he offered me a deal. I don't know, let's say year 3 in this. The deal was if I pled guilty, it'd be time served. I would never go back to prison. It'd be over. And he, it's like, you got a month to think about it, whatever. So, I don't need a month to really think about that one. That's a straight no.
Holy shit.
But I did take the month. Now, during that time, he announced his retirement. And then when I basically turned around and told him I'm not taking that deal, he took his retirement back.
Wow.
What sustained me was the truth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what sustained me. And like, whatever kept me alive, whatever that little flame inside of me was, I'm not letting them blow that out,
Yep. Wow.
I mean, it's certainly tempting, after you've been home for a couple years to think about you don't want to go back. And then a year after that, he turned around and offered me what's called an Alford plea, where that plea, you get to maintain your innocence. He gets his conviction because basically you're saying, I'm taking the deal because it's in my best interest. Mm-hmm. And, look, I built a network, I have cabinet secretaries in the governor's office on my cell phone that are friends of mine. I have access to the governor. I work with, mm-hmm. I helped Ray Lewis launch his nonprofit, Power 52, from the Baltimore Ravens. And, we work with Kevin Plank and Under Armour. We launched one of our community centers into the Under Armour house. So this is the network that I'm sort of moving in now. And I'm debating that. And then I'm dealing with this prosecutor who we already know lies, cheats, manipulates, and I know that if I go to trial, it's not going to be a fair trial yet again. And I got to weigh that. Do I really want to risk, this guy is so intent on protecting what he thinks is his legacy or whatever, rather than just admit, okay, I was wrong. Like, you weren't wrong. The FBI guy was wrong. You could have easily just said, okay, I went with the evidence, and now I know, like everybody else knows, that the FBI guy lied. But no, you got to take the position that you think I'm guilty, and you just got to keep coming after me. And that's that's where my anger or my bitterness is directed at him. And I will say this, interesting enough that we're doing this podcast taping today, he's been charged for what he did to me. He goes on trial Tuesday next week.
Wow.
Next week, Tuesday and Wednesday, he will be on trial. And there's 6 charges against him for what he did in my case. So if there's any karma, if there's any...
And who knows what he's done in all these other cases.
Exactly.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So, and that's why this is important.
But he's not going to do prison time, right?
No, the worst case is they disbar him. He's already retired, and he's already said he's not going to practice law again. So, there is no remedy to this. It has no bearing on my situation whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It doesn't affect me one way or the other. It's not... it's not about being vindictive. It's about, if we're ever going to start fixing this situation and create a criminal justice system that 18-year-old kid believed in, then this is how we start. You know what I mean? And that's why he's on trial next week. It's the Attorney Grievance Commission of Maryland that filed the charges.
Yeah. Not
me. I filed the request, but they investigated and they charged him. Mm-hmm. And I hope he's held accountable.
Yeah. Well, man, I'm really grateful that you were on the show. I mean, this was something that, I'm just sitting here thinking like how my life has ended up talking to you. You got an amazing story. Like, everything you said is like super commendable. Like, I don't know if I would be able to do anything similar to that. Like, I'm just sitting here in awe, to be honest with you.
I appreciate it. But I think too that, everybody has that inside of them, that resiliency and that ability to find your way back. Just like your title, Hell Has an Exit. It does. Mm-hmm. Be ornery, like be the cockroach that's going to survive everything. Just be ornery and survive. Mm-hmm. Find your way and survive. And, some of that stuff is always easier said than done. And it's hard, to put bitterness and things like that aside. But at the end of the day, there's another adage: don't drink poison and think the other person is going to die. Like, you're renting space in your head for somebody else. Like, own your own space in your head and control your reaction to situation. That's all you can do.
I really hope that, some type of justice is served. And, with what you're doing in the judicial system and like, all those innocent programs, man, it's just real commendable, to be honest with you.
My admiration is right back at you. Keep doing what you're doing and helping everybody out there that listens to you.
And thank you for doing it, man. I appreciate you, John.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it, man. It's been fun.
All right. Thank you. This show is not affiliated with any specific 12-step program. If you or a loved one is struggling with an addiction, please find a local 12-step meeting. If you believe you may need detox or drug treatment of any kind, please call 888-699-9395 to speak to a specialist. The show is sponsored by United Recovery Project, a state-of-the-art drug and alcohol rehab facility. You can visit our website at unitedrecoveryproject.com.